Welcome back, everyone. We are taught to envy the 1%. Most people, when it comes to America, the cars, the penthouse, the watches. But there is a secret crisis happening right now that no one is talking about, and they're trying to keep hitting as much as possible. The rich, as in the multimillionaire, not the elite class, the rich, the upper class, are going broke. Like I said, not the fake rich on Instagram. I'm talking about ultra wealthy. For 15 years, they use a strategy called the buy, borrow, die strategy to essentially live tax-free. But the Fed just broke that. And now the people with the most assets are realizing that they don't have any cash. So this video, let's break down exactly how the rich recession is happening. And I'm including this because most people feel like, oh, well, the rich aren't dealing with it. The rich aren't dealing with it. Well, they actually are. It's the elites that aren't dealing with it. But the rich, the people who are multimillionaires, the 10 mils or 20 mils, a lot of the strategies they were relying on aren't going well anymore. So let's move on to this next one.
The year is 2026. Picture yourself standing on the terrace of a Central Park penthouse, the kind of place that smells like old money and aggressive portfolio management. You're wearing a watch worth more than most people's annual salary. Downstairs sits a G-Wagon you've driven exactly twice. On paper, you are living the dream. You are the 1%. But there's a problem, a very specific, very mathematical problem. You reach into your pocket to pay the caterer, and your hand starts to shake. Not from cold, but from knowledge. Despite the assets, the cars, and the company valuation on your balance sheet, you have exactly $4,000 in your checking account. And this morning, the bank froze your $2 million line of credit. Welcome to the rich recession. For the first time in decades, the ultra-wealthy aren't just losing money on paper. They're going physically, undeniably broke at record rates. We're not talking about selling a vacation home. We're talking about entire net worths evaporating in months. From the commercial real estate collapse to the death of cheap money, the rules changed overnight. And the people who mastered the old rules are suddenly losing by the new ones. This is not a moral story about greed getting punished. This is a mechanical story about how financial systems work, how they break, and what happens when the math stops adding up. So let's dissect exactly what's happening and why it matters to everyone.
Now, real quick, that's the main reason why I always say there's a difference between earning money and earning wealth. It's that to earn wealth, you must understand the systems that you're playing in. And this is why it's important to stay informed, and why the elite's best thing against you is ignorance and a lack of assuming responsibility. If you don't assume responsibility, then you don't learn and adapt. And you have to understand the financial structures you are under. You have to understand the rules of the game to be able to play that game well. And that's essentially what's happened, especially for the rich. They gotten real comfortable. We all have seen it. We've all seen these companies these CEOs who everyone's wondering, how did you even get to this position because you're so incompetent? I'm sure people have managers they've worked for or bosses they've worked for where that's the feeling. It's exactly that. That is exactly the lulling asleep that a lot of these rich people got. They were able to get real comfortable with all the glamour, the cars, the money on paper, not realizing that you don't have any real wealth. You just got a lot of money. And this is why a lot of people are saying, well, making $300,000 a year in America, I'm still struggling. Well, that's why. So let's continue this. I don't want to keep going too far, but it's important. It's really important to understand that.
Not just the wealthy. For the last 15 years, if you were wealthy, you didn't spend your own money. That would be inefficient. Here's how the system actually worked. You own $100 million in Amazon stock. You walk into a private bank and say you want to live well, but you don't want to sell your shares. Selling would trigger capital gains tax, sometimes as high as 30 or 40%, depending on where you live. The bank says, no problem. We'll give you a low-interest loan backed by those shares. You live off the loan, pay minimal interest, and never pay taxes because you never sold the asset. This strategy even had a name in wealth management circles. Buy, borrow, die. Buy assets. Borrow against them. Die before you ever have to sell and pay taxes. Your heirs inherit at a stepped-up basis, and the tax bill vanishes. It was the closest thing to an infinite money glitch the financial system had ever created.
Yes, that that is how most rich people, or I'm sorry, really the elite class use, but once again, they are outside the system. They have the power to change the system whenever they see fit. So it doesn't affect the elite class as well as it affects the upper class and the people who believe they're untouchable or they're different than us. This is why I always say it's the elite class versus everyone else. Because this is how the wealthy avoided taxes for decades. They didn't sell their stocks. They borrowed against it at literally 1% interest, because in the bank's eyes, $100 million in Amazon stock, the closest thing to safe that you'll ever experience is Amazon. It's like, it's the closest thing. So it's 1% interest. So if you borrow the money, in tax wise, not tax advice, but I can comfortably say, if you borrow money, it's not income, it's debt. And because it's debt, you pay no taxes on it. And it was genius. I'm not even gonna lie. When I was working, I would hear about the strategy all the time. But unfortunately, this is why it pays to understand the financial system. It all works when interest rates are low. But in the moment interest rates hit 7%, now that free money is expensive debt. And this is the trap of leverage. It's all good when things are going up. Everything, the prices are going up and interest rates are going down. But it will suffocate you when interest rates go up, because now price to borrow money is way more expensive than it was in the past. And this is why I don't really encourage people to go all in on this strategy, because when things go wrong, like they are now you're in a situation where you don't have cash anymore. Now you're forced to sell. And because that's what a margin call is called. When the value of the 100 million, in this example, the 100 million shares drops too low, normally it'll say around 25%. Most banks will do what's called a margin call. They will ask, hey, your shares, your $100 million in shares are now worth $75 million. We want $15 or $20 million to protect us from the downside, which means you need to have the cash on hand. And if you don't have the cash on hand, they will sell those shares to get their money back, which means you are going to be the one who loses the $25 million and you won't have the shares anymore. So this is the financial game they're all playing. But once again, this is how, of course, it's not affecting most of us, but it is affecting them. And I want people to be informed that that's the reason why it's not just you. It's not just the lower class. Upper class is feeling this as well.
But here's what made it work: interest rates. For 15 years, from roughly 2008 to 2022, central banks around the world kept interest rates at or near zero. Money was free. A loan backed by stock cost you 1% per year, maybe less. If your stock portfolio was growing at 8 or 10% annually, borrowing at 1% was not just smart, it was the only rational choice. Then the Federal Reserve woke up and chose violence. Between 2022 and 2024, the Fed raised interest rates from near zero to over 5% in less than 2 years, the fastest rate increase in 4 decades. Suddenly, those lifestyle loans that cost 1% now cost 7, 8, even 10%. Let's follow what this does to a real person. We'll call him Tyler. Tyler is worth $50 million on paper in 2021. His wealth is tied up in a pre-IPO technology company where he is a founder. Tyler takes out what's called an S-block, a securities-backed line of credit for $10 million. He uses it to buy a house in Aspen and fund his lifestyle. The terms say that as long as his company's valuation stays high, he's safe. The collateral covers the loan. Then 2022 hits, the tech winter. Valuations across the board get slashed. 40%, 50%, sometimes 80%. Tyler's company, once valued at $500 million, gets revalued in a down round at $100 million. The bank calls Tyler. This is the margin call. They say, your collateral just lost 80% of its value. We need you to pay back $5 million of that loan today, or do we seize your assets? Tyler doesn't have $5 million in cash. He has a house in Aspen he can't sell fast enough in a frozen luxury real estate market. He has stock in a private company he legally cannot sell. Tyler is what finance people call illiquid. He's rich on paper and broke in reality.
Yes. That is the most important lesson in finance, essentially. In my course, I talk about credit cards. It's one of the things that I push, honestly, is having access to money. The most important lesson in finance is liquidity is king. Being able to have access to your wealth is the most important thing in finance. You can have, as this in this example, you can have $50 million a company on paper, but if you can't sell the stock, you can't buy groceries. We see athletes go through this all the time. They have the mansions and the cars, but when it comes time to them having to write a check for the government for $10,000, all of a sudden they don't have the cash. This is what is called being illiquid. It's just essentially a fancy word for being broke with nice stuff. So you don't confuse net worth for what's called solvency. That's what it means to be solvent. It means to have liquidity on hand. And this is why I tell people you want to have at least 1 year of liquid cash in a savings account. Because if anything happens, you have 1 year to essentially maneuver, do things you got to do, be flexible, and change your life or your lifestyle. So once you finally get back on track, you'll be safe. You won't be forced to sell assets. But a lot of rich people, that's exactly what's happening right now. Being forced to sell assets because they don't have cash anymore.
This is not a rare story. According to recent data from Capgemini, the liquidity ratio of high net worth individuals dropped to its lowest point in a decade. They are asset heavy and cash starved. When you see someone described as a billionaire going broke, it's rarely because they bought too many yachts. It's because they leveraged their assets to the maximum. And when the cost of that leverage tripled, the math broke. They were being forced to sell prize assets at fire sale prices just to satisfy margin calls from banks. The buy, borrow, die strategy has turned into buy, borrow, cry. If you're paying 7% interest on a $50 million loan, you need to generate $3.5 million in cash every year just to service that debt. If your assets aren't paying dividends or rent, you're bleeding out. And that brings us to the second reason the wealthy are facing a crisis: the commercial real estate apocalypse. Yep. For generations, commercial real estate was considered the safest place to park serious wealth. It was boring, predictable money. You buy an office tower in Manhattan or San Francisco. You fill it with tenants paying long-term leases. You collect rent checks for decades. It was the bond substitute for people who didn't trust bonds. But the world changed and the buildings didn't. Let's walk through what's happening right now. You're a real estate investor. Let's call you Larry. In 2019, Larry bought a Class A office building in downtown Los Angeles for $200 million. Larry didn't pay cash. He put down $50 million of his own money and borrowed $150 million from a regional bank. Fast forward to today. Remote work is not a trend anymore. It's a permanent structural shift in how companies operate. Larry's building is 40% vacant. The tenants who remain are negotiating lower rents or threatening to leave. But the real problem isn't the vacancy. It's the loan maturity. Commercial real estate loans aren't like residential mortgages. They don't last 30 years at a fixed rate. They typically last 5 to 7 years, and then you have to refinance. Larry's loan is due now. He goes to the bank to refinance that $150 million. The bank looks at the building. It's half empty. Interest rates are high. The bank says, "Larry, this building isn't worth $200 million anymore. Based on current occupancy and rental rates, it's worth $90 million. Do the math with me. Current value, $90 million. Loan amount, $150 million. Larry is underwater by $60 million. The bank won't refinance the full loan amount. They say if you want to keep this building, you need to write us a check for $60 million to cover the gap between the loan and the current value. Larry doesn't have $60 million in liquid cash. So what happens? He hands the keys back to the bank. He walks away. His initial $50 million equity investment, his real wealth, is gone, completely wiped out. This isn't a hypothetical scenario. This is happening across major cities right now. In San Francisco, office towers that sold for $300 million a few years ago are now selling for $60 million. That's an 80% destruction of wealth. In New York, investment syndicates of wealthy professionals, doctors, lawyers, business owners who pooled their money into what they thought were safe real estate deals are seeing their entire investment written down to zero. Yeah. The Wall Street Journal reported that trillions of dollars in commercial real estate debt is maturing between now and 2026. This is a ticking time bomb.
Real quick, it's not like we aren't experiencing this. As the lower and middle class, they're experiencing this in real time in the car market. A lot of people bought cars, overpriced cars, especially EVs. The best example is a Cybertruck. People bought Cybertruck for $110,000. A year or two later, now it's worth $80. Now it's worth $70, and it keeps going down. And now you're underwater. And this is where some car dealerships will say, "Hey, here's a bridge loan. Here's a bridge insurance." I forgot what it's called, but it bridges that gap Unfortunately, you don't have that type of insurance when it comes to buildings like this. Now, you could get it, but the prices they're paying, the insurance will be astronomical. So most of the time they don't do it because they don't expect the value to drop. This is why it's important to stay informed, because as things change, as cultural climates change, political climates change, geopolitics change, as all these changes happen, it made sense commercial was going to fall apart. When they push all the technology stuff in COVID, it was people don't want to go back to work, which is why they're forcing people to come back in. The mandates to come back in the office. That's the reason why, because it justifies their commercial real estate values. The need the people to get in there. So they are a slave without them even realizing they're slaves. Now they push, like they are just, well, they're the slave master, essentially, is what I'll say, but they have their own slave master. And their slave master is, we need to figure out a way to get this money back because, as I've said in previous videos, they're all about money. They're a slave to this now and the leverage they took out of it. So they put the pressure on us as workers. We need to come back in so our values look good. I just wanted to make sure I bring that up just because that's it is affecting everybody.
Limited partners in these deals, often people in the top 1% trying to diversify their wealth, are getting capital calls they cannot meet. Imagine receiving a letter that says, remember that $500,000 you invested in that office park 3 years ago? It's gone. Also, the property needs major repairs, so you actually owe us another $50,000. That is the current reality for thousands of high net worth investors. Now, while real estate portfolios are imploding, there's another pressure building. One that has nothing to do with investments and everything to do with the cost of simply existing at that level. Let's talk about lifestyle inflation. You've heard of the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. It measures the cost of eggs, milk, gasoline. But if you're in the top 1%, you don't care about the price of milk. You have a different inflation rate. Some analysts call it the cost of living extremely well index. And that index is currently vertical. The media reports inflation is cooling down to around 3%. But for the wealthy, the real inflation rate on the specific things they consume is closer to 15 or 20%. Why? Because the goods and services wealthy people need, specialized labor, privacy, security, and insurance, have exploded in price. Let's step into a scenario playing out right now in coastal zip codes. You made your wealth in technology or finance. You retired to a $25 million estate with ocean views. Life is perfect. Then you check your mail. Inside is a letter from your insurance company. It's polite but final. It says, due to increased wildfire and hurricane risk exposure, we are declining to renew your homeowner's policy effective immediately. You panic. You call your insurance broker. He tells you, I've called everyone. Nobody's writing policies in your zip code anymore. You are uninsurable. This is not a theoretical problem. In 2024 and 2025, major insurance companies pulled out of California and Florida entirely. If you own a $20 million home and you can't get insurance, you technically cannot have a mortgage. Yeah. Banks require insurance. And if you try to sell that house, you need to find a buyer willing to pay $20 million in cash and accept the risk of the property burning down or flooding with zero insurance coverage.
Yes, this is the hamster wheel. This is the hamster wheel. This is what I was explaining in real estate. You can ask for whatever you want to ask for, but you have to, if you want to sell your house for $900,000, you have to find a buyer willing to pay $900,000, not for the high net worth, as he's mentioning. Well, if your house is uninsurable, you can't get a mortgage, which means you have to find a buyer who has $20 million willing to spend for your particular house just to get you from underwater. This is why I was able to see the collapse coming from a mile away, because that's the inevitable consequence. Once the margin calls start, when one person has to pull back, everyone has to pull back. And because, as he just mentioned, liquidity in the ultra wealthy is so low right now, everyone's not doing well. And this also explains why Warren Buffett started collecting cash around 2023. I can tell he could see this. This is why he started selling when he did. He was selling since, actually, I think he was selling since 2021, 2022. And now he has one of the biggest cash piles in the world right now. But that's why, because he understood how important liquidity was going to be when everyone's in a position like he's in, or like this theoretical person, whoever he's talking about, is in. Now, when you are forced to sell lower, then you have to declare bankruptcy. Well, now they can get it pennies on a dollar. And this is what I want my audience to do. We got to get our lives together. We got to get 6 months of savings, like I said, preferably a year if we can. But start with 3 months, baby steps. Get 3 months of your needs, expenses met. Then once you get there, then slowly get up to 6. Are there going to be things that are going to happen? Yes, but that's why it's a lifestyle. This isn't something you do and you stop doing. It's a lifestyle. You're constantly, when a car breaks down, use the 3 months, buy the stuff, but constantly keep putting yourself in the green to eventually when you hit 6 months to a year, now all your extra money, instead of going toward that, can finally go toward getting assets. But now you are liquid. Now if anything happens, you're not plucking the weeds out. You're not plucking the roots from those money trees we're growing. Those assets were growing. You can't sell the assets when times are bad, like everyone's having to do right now. That's when that's where bankruptcies are happening. Anyway, let me keep going.
The value of your biggest asset just dropped 30% overnight because it now carries catastrophic uninsurable risk. But it's not just the house. During the pandemic, wages for household employees went nuclear. You used to be able to hire a top-tier estate manager for $90,000 a year. Today, in Los Angeles or New York, a qualified estate manager demands $180,000 to $250,000, plus full benefits plus a vehicle. If you employ a nanny, a private chef, and housekeeping staff, your annual burn rate just to keep your home running has jumped from $250,000 to $500,000 per year. And remember, that's after tax money. To net $500,000 after taxes, you need to earn nearly $1 million just to pay the people who maintain your house. Then there's education. If you have children in elite private schools, tuition at places like Dalton or Phillips Exeter is now pushing $60,000 to $70,000 per year per child. If you have 3 children, that's over $200,000 annually. This creates a strange phenomenon. You have people earning $2 million a year who feel genuinely broke. They're running on a treadmill set to maximum speed.
Oh, there you go.
One bad year in the market, one lawsuit, one major health issue, and the whole structure collapses. Now let's talk about where a lot of that wealth actually went. The startup casino. If you wanted to look sophisticated at a dinner party in 2021, you didn't talk about your stock portfolio. You talked about your angel investments. For a decade, interest rates were zero and money was free. So wealthy professionals, doctors, lawyers, business owners stopped buying boring index funds and started playing venture capitalist. They threw money at anything with a clever pitch deck. They were chasing unicorns. Startups valued at $1 billion or more. The year is 2025, and most of those unicorns are dead.
Yeah. All right, that's about most of what I wanted to talk about. Like, my goal with this is essentially the rules have changed. And for the last decade, the winners were the people who took the most risk and used the most debt, which is what the rich did. But now, cash is king, which really isn't cash, it's liquidity, having access to cash when you need to sell, when you need to buy something as things get worse, where your living is to be important. The lesson here isn't to laugh at the rich, because we all can do that, to learn from their mistakes. True wealth isn't about how much you can borrow. It's about how much you actually own. Don't build a lifestyle that essentially requires the most perfect conditions to survive. Our goal is to build a life that when the storm hits, hitting right now, we can survive. That should be your baseline. You want to be able to survive. And with perfect conditions, we can amplify slowly our lifestyle. But we always must be prepared when the storm comes. This is going to come. It's not if, it's when. So we need to make sure that we are protected. Unfortunately, with the rich, they overextended themselves. And now they're about to go through the bankruptcies just like everyone else. Like I said, the elite class can avoid this. But the upper class, yeah, they're going through it just like we are. So, great talking to you. See you again next time.